An Irrational Hatred of Luton, a West Ham fan's story by Robert Banks. Forward by Tony Cottee. Chapter 69. I Can't Let Go. West Ham United 2, Cambridge United 0. 8th of May 1993. My eldest nephew expressed an interest in coming along to Upton Park. I should have done the kindest thing and told him to forget it, or shot him, but he was wearing his Hammers shirt that I'd given him for his 4th birthday, and he'd been nagging me for some time, and I finally gave in. I bought 2 tickets in the family enclosure in the East Stand for the game against Brentford. Things were looking a bit dicey. Portsmouth were ahead by 3 points, but had scored 3 more goals than us, which put them ahead despite the fact that we conceded a lot fewer. Portsmouth had 4 games left, like ourselves. They had to play Notts County away, Wolves at home, Sunderland away, and Grimsby at home. None of them looked a formality, and that was what we were counting on. We, meanwhile, had to play Brentford, Bristol Rovers and Cambridge at home, and Swindon away. Whilst the 3 home games looked simple on paper, all 3 opponents were fighting a losing battle against relegation, and would spit and fight all the way down. Brentford came first. They played well in the first half, with former West Ham man Alan Dickens running the midfield, but a Peter Butler header put us 1-0 up at half-time. We knew it wasn't enough. We needed more goals. Portsmouth were drawing at Notts County. This was a good opportunity to catch them. In the second half, we cut loose and scored 3 more, through Kevin Keane, Trevor Morley and Martin Allen. The news filtered through that Portsmouth had won 1-0 at Notts County, and was still 3 points ahead, but we were now level on goals scored. My nephew Mark was hooked. His enthusiasm rubbed back off onto me. I'd been quite prepared, at one stage, to miss the last few games of the season, as I had already missed so many, but now I was back in 86-87 mode. I didn't want to miss a kick. The following week, I took the opportunity to pay my last respects to another old friend we lost in 1993, the South Bank. Although it wasn't the last home game of the season, I already had West Stand tickets for the Cambridge game, and therefore took the opportunity to say farewell. Bristol Rovers still had a chance of avoiding the drop if they beat us. They played with some purpose, going ahead in the second half, but Julian Dix and that trash Speedy put us through with 3 points. Speedy was going to have to do better than that to impress me. Our 2-goal victory had been bettered by Portsmouth, who beat Wolves 3-1. We were back where we'd started, 1 goal and 3 points behind. Sunderland came to our rescue. They beat Portsmouth 4-1 at Roker Park, and we knew what we had to do. Now we were 3 points and 2 goals behind as we played Swindon at the county ground. Our final live TV appearance of the season. Somehow we felt that a 2-goal victory would be too much to ask. If the game had been played on the Saturday, I don't think we'd have won 3-1. It was only the fact that we knew what we had to do to overhaul Portsmouth gave us the edge in the race for second spot. Trevor Morley scored the first goal, and both Clive Allen and Kenny Brown scored after coming on as second-half substitutes. Jim Smith, the Portsmouth manager, was co-commentator on ITV and was very diplomatic, but inwardly he must have been cursing the TV schedules. Newcastle tied up the championship at Grimsby, so there was only one place available, and we occupied it as we went into the last game of the season. The mathematics were relatively simple once again. As long as we won, and won by scoring as many or more goals than Portsmouth, we were up. If we drew, we had to hope that Portsmouth drew or lost. The goals scored factor was throwing a real spanner in the works. It meant that if we drew 0-0, but Portsmouth drew 2-2, they would go up, and we would have to take our chances in the playoffs. It was farcical. Nearly everyone in the ground had a transistor radio with them, as Steve Potts deservedly won Hammer of the Year and the game kicked off. To say the atmosphere was tense would be like saying Duncan Goodhue needs a hair transplant. We made a few chances, and Cambridge employed Wimbledon-type tactics, combined with a good degree of time-wasting, shirt-pulling and general bitchiness. The news came through from Fratton Park that Grimsby had scored. It lifted the crowd, but didn't transmit to the pitch. Passes were going astray, and tackles mistimed. Whatever Bill and Harry said at half-time had the desired effect, and Speedy scored, barging Keane out of the way to fire a shot into the roof of the net, What a hero. I've always liked that David Speedie, even when he was at Chelsea. I always thought he was a class act. Fickle git. Portsmouth equalised. It got tense again. If Portsmouth scored another, we'd be level on goals scored and would have to rely on the fact that we conceded fewer. Cambridge had a goal disallowed, and a small sewage works emanated from the west stand. A rumour went round that Grimsby had scored again, but it wasn't true. Whoever started that rumour was a gimp. I had my radio firmly up against my ear and was quick to quash the rumour as it reached us. Eventually we heard that Portsmouth had scored and were looking good. We were in the doggy-do. If Pompey got another one, we were out of it. Cambridge were making life extraordinarily difficult for us, but as the game wore on, aware of their own situation, they began to push forward and lost a bit of shape. Julian Dix capitalised and set up Clive Allen for his easiest goal in a West Ham shirt. It may have been the easiest, but it was also the most important and the most fervently received. The crowd spilled onto the pitch from the south bank and held him arms aloft. The referee managed to restore order and played the last couple of minutes, but you could see he couldn't wait to get off the pitch. The final whistle went. Aware of what had happened a couple of seasons ago, I waited for the classified results on the radio before celebrating. Portsmouth had won 2-1. We finished level on points with them, but had scored one more goal. That goal scored record is so much better than goal difference, don't you think? It didn't actually make any odds. Our goal difference was vastly superior to Portsmouth, so we won on both counts. I celebrated on the pitch with Tim and about 10,000 other friends. Although we had again finished second, the disappointment wasn't as great because we had known since October that we were playing for second spot. We fought hard and won. It was very satisfying. In the back of my mind, though, I saw pictures of 91-92 and feared a one-season stay in the top flight. As I leapt back over the wall into the west stand, I saw the Cambridge supporters, some of them crying and some with heads in their hands. I remembered how we'd sent Manchester City down in 1987 and thought for a second of giving a few words of consolation. I then compared the two games mentally. Manchester City had come and played football with spirit and skill, and we won an entertaining game 2-0. Cambridge came and kicked and scraped their way to a 2-0 defeat. Division 2 could have them. They deserved it. As I walked past, I said, "Bad luck, you'll have to try playing football next season." I think they got the point. Chapter 70. Summer Holiday. West Ham United 0, Queen's Park Rangers 4. 28th of August 1993. I needed a holiday to compensate for the fact that Arsenal had won both the major cup competitions. Despite the fact I had 2 holidays the previous year and promised myself I couldn't afford one, I'd obtained a credit card and they were always harping on about extending my limit. So I got them to put their money where their mouth was. Kevin and I went to Corfu for a week in July, together with 2 friends of his who I already knew socially, Stephen and Mark the Arsenal fan. Being an Arsenal fan, Mark was in smug mode most of the holiday, and I did my best to keep the conversation away from football, but it was difficult when there were 4 committed football fans living together for a week. Fortunately, we all supported different teams, so there was no danger of any ganging up. The wonderful Helen had asked me to keep an eye on Kevin and make sure his roving eye didn't cause any trouble. "I can't see it causing us any trouble," I assured her. "I didn't mean for you," she giggled. "I meant for him." Talking to the wonderful Helen was like flinging open a window and taking in 2 deep lungfuls of fresh country air. I'd ignored her for so long because of her involvement with my best mate, but the nagging doubts were beginning to enter my head. I almost found myself encouraging Kevin to go for it on holiday in order that I could grass him up when we got back and I could ride off into the sunset with the wonderful Helen. Nothing terribly exciting happened the whole week except on 2 occasions. Firstly, I went into Benitz's wearing my brand new West Ham shirt, manufactured somewhat appropriately by Pony. I discovered that Benitz's was a northern stronghold full of Newcastle, Blackburn, Manchester United, Leeds and Sheffield Wednesday supporters. I was shitting bricks. You could have taken home some of the looks I got and still not been able to describe the feeling of utter humiliation. The second exciting thing to happen was blonde, Swedish and called Anna. She wasn't Karen too in the beauty department, but I wasn't in a position to be too picky. The other three had gone off to Masongi Beach for the last day, but I decided to walk into Corfu town, buy presents and keep out of the sun. Both Mark, the Arsenal fan, and I had bought hats to keep the sun off our heads, but found that we both had trouble keeping them on. Even a brisk walking pace was enough to dislodge it. As I set off for Corfu town, my hat disappeared. I turned round to fetch it to find Anna holding it. "I catch your hat," she smiled. Her English wasn't very good, but it was a hell of a lot better than my Swedish. I asked if she'd like to catch something else, and we went back to the hotel for the afternoon. I'm not sure what I expected, but it was certainly a gratifying experience. I was surprised how easy it was to remember what to do. I can confidently state that what David Mellor has done for Chelsea, Anna has done for West Ham. By that definition, she is, at the time of writing, the last person in a West Ham shirt to score 4 times in 90 minutes. Fully relaxed and refreshed, I returned home to find Karen too still indifferent, the wonderful Helen still wonderful, and another exam hanging ominously on the horizon. Mark eagerly awaited the start of the season. He too sported a brand new pony shirt, and we strolled boldly into our first game, ergo first defeat. West Ham pounded away at Wimbledon without effect, the only notable efforts coming from long-range shots by Julian Dix. Wimbledon inevitably took the lead. They were unbeaten in league matches at Upton Park, despite losing both cup ties played there. There was a hint of foul play about both goals. Don't ask me exactly what. There's something about Wimbledon's style of play that makes you believe they can't achieve anything without cheating. They were probably both perfectly legitimate. 3 days later, we were still pointless and goalless after losing 1-0 at Leeds. Things were looking bad. I listened to the commentary on the radio and heard nothing to give me the slightest bit of confidence. Stuart, the QPR fan, offered me the chance of a short break away from the pressure. QPR were at home to Southampton the following Saturday. West Ham were away at Coventry. As our hoodoo over Coventry had been broken, I reasoned I should take the free ticket being offered and not trek miles to watch us lose again. QPR had also had a poor start, but at least they'd scored a couple of goals. They'd lost 4-1 at Villa on the opening day and 3-1 to Liverpool. Now we were back in the Premiership, it was goal difference that counted, not goals scored, and perversely we were above QPR on goal difference. We weren't by 5 o'clock. Although Dale Gordon had scored our first goal of the season and won our first point, QPR beat Southampton 2-1 and automatically went 2 points ahead of us. The next Wednesday, West Ham displayed great grit and tenacity to overcome Sheffield Wednesday 2-0 at Upton Park. The Wednesday side included such big names as Chris Waddle, David Hurst, Mark Bright and Des Walker, so we all thought it was a fantastic win. Clive Allen scored 2 goals that proved to be his last for West Ham. They were typical Allen goals, the first a neat flick inside the 6-yard box, the second a brilliant dummy sold to Chris Woods, then squeezing the ball home from an impossible angle. We were filled with confidence for the visit of QPR. It turned out to be false optimism. We were not to know that Sheffield Wednesday were getting off to one of the slowest starts in their history, and anything but a victory against them would have been an injustice. QPR had been unlucky in their first 2 games and had subsequently beaten Southampton, then lost at Chelsea. QPR were about to embark on another positive season though, finishing 9th. We were one of their victims. I'd arranged for seats in our family enclosure for Mark, my dad and Stuart the QPR fan. I was obviously hoping West Ham would win, just as Stuart the QPR fan was hoping for a Rangers victory, but we both wanted it to be a narrow one. When Darren Peacock put QPR ahead in the first half, there was little to suggest what would follow. Stuart the QPR fan sat on his hands with a sort of constipated expression on his face that made him pass quite easily for a Hammers fan. Mark was inconsolable as the 4th goal went in. He was convinced he was a jink because he'd been twice so far that season and hadn't even seen us score a goal. I, on the other hand, knew that it was actually my fault. I'd parked the car on Stuart the QPR fan's driveway. We always lost when I did that. Mark's jinx continued during the home game with Swindon, but at least we managed to get a point in a 0-0 draw. The previous match had ended in an inevitable defeat by Manchester United at Old Trafford 3-0. To our surprise, Mark Robson was sold to Charlton for $125,000. This wasn't a move we could quite understand. He had looked a little lightweight during his first 2 Premiership appearances, but then so had everyone else. It was a bit of a rash move to offload him like that, particularly so cheaply. As Kevin Keane had also left during the summer, it left us without the two players who had provided most of our goals for our strikers in 92-93. Still, Billy and Harry knew best, didn't they? I'd arranged to go to the Munich Beer Festival with Foxy in about 1987. Every year we then promised ourselves we'd go without quite making it. In 1993 he made the effort to actually sort out a booking and we were on. 3 of us made the trip, myself, Foxy and his brother Martin. We took the coach from Victoria and soon found that of the 76 people on board, we were the only Englishmen. The rest were all Australian, New Zealanders and South Africans. We arrived for the opening day of the beer fest and had a bit of trouble finding somewhere to park our bums. The rule was that you had to be sitting down at a table in order to be served. The Fraus serving the beer were as ugly as sin and had no sense of humour, so we had to make the best of it. They were bloody strong though. Each one could carry 5 steins, each containing 2 litres of lager, in each hand. You try doing that at home and you'll almost surely come a cropper. My mind was on other things as we polished off our 3rd stein of the day. "We'll just be kicking off at Blackburn," I said to Foxy, who was already starting to get a bit fuzzy. "Yes," he said, "and Spurs will be playing at Oldham." There was nowhere on campus to get hold of results. We had to wait until the following morning, when we all looked and felt our best, to get the results on the CNN channel, in our hotel room. The Aussies in the next room didn't quite know what was going on, as we both whooped with joy at the results. Chapter 71. Dig the New Breed. Blackburn Rovers 0, West Ham United 2, 18th September 1993. Tottenham beat Oldham 5-0, so Foxy was pleased, but I was ecstatic. We'd beaten the millionaires of Blackburn, on their own patch. This was too good to be true. I assumed that Steve Jones had continued to play up front in the absence of Clive Allen, and as there were no more details on the TV, supposed that he'd been involved in the goals. I was very pleased for him. I didn't think to phone Dad to try and find out more details. The result would keep me going until I got home on Tuesday. It seemed silly to make a fuss when I was only away for a few days. Besides, there was some serious drinking to be done. We got chatted up by some South African girls. It's funny, but no matter how attractive a South African girl is, I'm always put off by the accent. It's so aggressive. They might be the nicest people in the world, but they always sound as though they're about to rip you apart. We declined their offers and went in search of the Lowenbrow tent instead. Ate half a chicken, smoked a very rich cigar, and then went on a roller coaster. Just thinking about it again makes me want to chuck. When I got home, I phoned Dad, who gave me the somewhat confused details of the weekend. "Dix has gone," he said. That was a downer. It had been on the cards, but it was still a massive downer. "How much?" I said. "Oh, we swapped him for Thingy and what's his name." "Great. I always admired Thingy." "Think harder, Dad." "Burrows and Marsh." There was a silence of about 20 seconds while I digested that information and looked at the calendar to make sure it wasn't April. "Are you sure?" If there were 2 players I could have named in the Liverpool squad who I could not have imagined as West Ham players, it would have been Thingy and what's his name. "Oh, there's more," he said. "With the loose change we bought Lee Dixon." "Now come on, Dad, this time you are joking." Not Dixon, Lee Chapman. He scored on Saturday." "Chapman, yes. Signing Lee Chapman was a dream come true for me. I'd long been an admirer of his since his days at Sheffield Wednesday. He always scored plenty of goals and was, in my view, just the type of player we needed 5 years ago. I'd even gone to the trouble of writing to John Lyall and pointing out the fact that Chapman was playing in France and was unhappy. We should make a bid for him. I wasn't to know that Chapman was involved in a tug-of-love battle between Robert Maxwell and Brian Clough, and that any other offers might have sent him doolally, but I was very, very pleased that we'd signed him at last. I dragged Dad down to Upton Park for the game against Chesterfield in the Coca-Cola Cup, surviving a drenching in a thunderstorm on the way, to see West Ham win 5-1. Chapman could do no wrong. OK, this was 3rd Division opposition, but everything he touched turned to gold. He won a penalty for the first goal, deflected a Bishop shot into the net for the second, and won a free kick for Burrows to score the third. In the second half he scored another, and generally proved to be too much for the Chesterfield centre-backs to handle. At last, a striker who would cause problems for visiting defences. To cap it all, he was married to the delicious Leslie Ash, so there was a chance of spotting her at the odd game or two. Another new signing was Jeroen Borer, a Dutch under-21 player signed from Go Ahead Eagles. I wasn't sure if it was such a good move to buy a player with a club with a name like that, but he played well in the reserve games and I'd heard good reports about him, so I was pleased that at least Billy and Harry hadn't just tried to make the best of things. In conjunction with the board, they'd made an effort to improve things, and it appeared to be working. Mum and Dad found a house they liked in Hastings, and I was hired to go and carry out a structural survey, giving it a clean bill of health, despite a few signs of woodworm. On the way back, the radio received a bit of a bashing as I heard we'd lost 2-0 at Newcastle, and Borer had been sent off. Not the best way to start a new career. The good home form continued against Chelsea, winning 1-0 with a Trevor Morley goal. Dennis Wise was sent off for Chelsea, always an amusing situation. The Dutchman got onto the score sheet at Chesterfield in the second leg of the Coca-Cola Cup tie, Martin Allen getting the other one in a 2-0 win. We then drew 0-0 with Aston Villa, mainly because Mark came with me. By now I had abandoned the idea of parking my car on the driveway of Stuart the QPR fan. That, combined with the 4 recent signings, seemed to have turned things in our favour. While we played out a 0-0 draw at Norwich at Carrow Road, I watched QPR smack Coventry 5-1. You won't believe me, but I'd predicted 5-1 as a scoreline, but didn't have the balls to put any money on it. The following Tuesday, I faced my professional exam again. I went through it feeling much less nervous, having already been through the procedure before, and was helped a great deal by the fact that I saw many familiar faces in the exam room from friends at college. We went for a quick pint afterwards, and after discussing it all thoroughly, I felt reasonably confident that I'd cracked it at last, and after 9 years as a mere worker, I'd finally made it as a professional. I still had to wait a month for confirmation of the results. Meanwhile, the next day West Ham played Nottingham Forest in the third round of the Coca-Cola Cup. I decided to keep away from it totally and just watch the highlights on the late programme. Despite being a local TV show, they rated Sunderland versus Aston Villa as being of more interest to London fans, and West Ham brought up the rear again. A 2-1 defeat was a little hard to take, particularly as Forest were not doing particularly well in the First Division. The next day I sat down and wrote a 350-word piece about it for 90 Minutes magazine in their Do the Right Thing competition. I sent it off, again knowing that I'd have to wait a month for the results. Unlike my professional exams though, I forgot all about it. It was pretty lonely up in the flat. I bought myself a cat, well, a kitten anyway. Kevin had said it was the only way I was going to get any pussy into my bedroom at that time, and he was probably right. The little ginger ball of fluff was suitably named. I called him Ludo. Ludo was going to be my lucky mascot, especially after we beat Manchester City 3-1 at Upton Park, with goals from Burrows, Chapman and Matty Holmes. I'd got into a midweek game routine, meeting Tim at Cannon Street for a couple of pints before the game, and then jumping straight onto a District Line train to Upton Park. Again, I protest my innocence to those people who accuse me of being superstitious, but we always won when I went through this procedure, and Tim was more than happy to comply. It was so successful we tried doing it on Saturdays, but it didn't work because Cannon Street Station is closed on a Saturday. Certainly the lucky mascot powers of Ludo didn't last very long, as we lost 2-0 at Liverpool. While the game was going on, I was at Loftus Road watching Blackburn lose 1-0 with Stuart the QPR fan. Blackburn had just paid silly money for Tim Flowers, who was making his debut. We had to laugh. At least Mark finally lost his hoodoo over games at Upton Park, as we saw West Ham beat Oldham 2-0 the following Saturday. It was a game we expected to win. Things really had changed. It was largely without incident, except for the fact that Oldham had a player sent off. Then someone in the crowd blew a whistle. Mike Marsh thought it was full time and picked the ball up. The referee awarded a free kick to Oldham, and they sportingly gave the ball straight back to Marsh. It almost made up for the throw-in incident at Boundary Park a couple of seasons before. Almost, but not quite. The game against Arsenal proved to be a turning point in more ways than one. It was the time when the team really arrived as a Premiership side. Everyone began to sit up and take notice after this 0-0 draw, which Arsenal achieved. We had always achieved 0-0 draws until that stage. Now teams were praised for getting a result at Upton Park. Of course, Arsenal only got that result by cheating. We'd played them off the park, and when Marsh put Trevor Morley through late in the second half, it seemed a certain goal. We hadn't reckoned on David Seaman committing the crime of the century, though. He wrestled Morley to the ground with his arm around his neck just outside the penalty area. Seaman had to be sent off. The referee had no choice, but the punishment hardly fitted the crime. Arsenal were able to bring on their reserve goalkeeper, Alan Miller, by withdrawing Ian Wright, and the resultant free kick from David Burrows was cleared off the line. It had shades of Willie Young, Paul Allen in the 1980 Cup final. The sense of injustice was just as great. I was so incensed after the game, I bought a couple of fanzines at Upton Park Tube Station and read them on the way home. The fanzines were Overland and Sea and Home Alone. I read them on the tube and soon found myself having a little chuckle to myself. The humour was biting, the style clean and incisive. I wondered whether the editor might be interested in the article I'd written about my life as a West Ham fan. I had written the article initially for the magazine When Saturday Comes, but had received such a negative response from the editor, I decided not to punt it around anywhere else. I spent the next morning at work trying to find the article amongst my collections of floppy disks and amended it according to the style of the fanzine. I put it in the post, more in hope than expectation, and a couple of days later received a call from Gary Firmager, editor of Overland and Sea. I was astounded. He loved the article and said it would be going in the next issue. It was such an ego boost to find someone who actually liked something I'd written. Even when I'd sold articles and stories, no one had taken the trouble to comment on the style and the content of my work, or dish out praise. I met Gary for the first time the next day as we played Wimbledon at Selhurst Park. He'd given me a description of himself, which meant I couldn't fail to find him. To add to my big head, West Ham won 2-1 at Wimbledon with 2 goals from Lee Chapman. We were steaming up the table, and having already won 2-0 at Southampton, we sat in 10th place, our highest league placing for 7 years. It was looking good. Of course, it was inevitable that someone would come along and burst the bubble. It was my own fault. I parked my car on the driveway of Stuart, the QPR fan. We inevitably lost to Leeds United, giving away a goal a few minutes from time. A real sickener. My lasting memory of the game was that I was sitting among Leeds United fans who were good as gold. At the end of the game they chanted, "There's only one Lee Chapman." In later months it was something that would ring around my head, and I had to force myself to believe it had been true. A few days later I saw myself in print for the first time in Overland and Sea, as I took my dad to the game against Coventry City. We won 3-2, playing some of the best football we'd seen for years. This was better than anything we'd seen during the 21-match unbeaten run in 1990, and was certainly comparable with some of the football played in 1985-86. Chapter 72. Walls Come Tumbling Down. Sheffield Wednesday 5, West Ham United 0. 18th of December 1993. I failed my exam again. This time it was terminal. Mike lost patience with me, and I can't say I blame him. The day I got my results, he took me out to lunch and tried to soften the blow of redundancy with a bottle of red wine. I can't describe the mixture of emotion I was experiencing as he outlined the reasons why I should leave. I didn't need to be told. I knew I'd messed up and betrayed everyone's faith in me. The main reason for my upset was the fact that as a small company, and having been part of the team for 2.5 years, it was almost as though we were a small family. It was like my dad coming to see me and say, "Sorry son, we can't use you anymore. You better find yourself a new mum and dad." Fortunately, Karen too had the day off and didn't see me in a state of distress. I made an excuse about having to go and feed the cat and went upstairs to the flat and had a good hard sob. I knew Mike had no choice. I faced a hard decision. He'd been good enough to give me 2 months' notice, and therefore I had 2 months to find another job, or, more in line with my thinking, a new career. It was almost as though my examiners had sensed I didn't really want to be a chartered surveyor. Ever since I'd discovered writing, I'd been determined to find a career that involved more use of the written word in a creative sense. As it was, I was already getting a bit too flowery with my business letters. Dear Mrs. Jones, thank you for your most eloquent epistle of the 18th. It wasn't appreciated by anyone. I applied for thousands of jobs with newspapers and magazines and didn't get so much as an acknowledgement. It seemed I was about to face a period of unemployment for the first time in my life. Christmas approached and West Ham were on a high as they faced Sheffield Wednesday at Hillsborough. We were only 1-0 down at half-time. I listened to the game on the radio as I wrapped Christmas presents and felt the physical pang of pain every time a second-half goal went in. 5-0 was a terrible result and a huge knock to the confidence. I couldn't quite understand it. Even seeing the goals on Match of the Day failed to provide any enlightenment. Elaine held a Christmas party the same evening. I needed something to cheer me up, and the thought of spending some time with Karen too in a party atmosphere filled me with anticipation. She spent most of the evening dancing very suggestively with a real creep of a guy who I didn't know and didn't want to know. There was some armpit encouraging me to go and ask her to dance. I felt like thumping him. It was obvious she wanted me to get the message that she wasn't interested. I decided to leave before they started getting physical or my head exploded. It was gut-wrenching. It seemed that everywhere I looked there were people slobbering over each other, and the only pussy I could look forward to when I got home had 4 legs and a name tag. I drove home despite being well over the legal limit and didn't get out of bed until Monday. I was experiencing the same emptiness I'd felt when Diana told me it was over. This time I didn't even have the consolation of memories. I had nothing. No job, no woman, no hope. Merry Christmas. Humbug. West Ham didn't help. They scrambled a 1-1 draw at Ipswich and then the next day lost 3-1 to Spurs at Upton Park. I'd paid £20 to a tout for a £9 terrace ticket and wasn't happy after the game. I couldn't wait to get back to work, take my mind off life. At least I still had writing, but even then I had very few ideas and was relying on my course to provide me with inspiration. I was too choked up about Karen too to write anything emotional or romantic. Football writing took over. On New Year's Day, Kevin and I took my nephew and the wonderful Helen's 2 nephews, Miles and Luke, to Ipswich to watch the game between Ipswich and Liverpool. Kevin had been starting to wind me up in a variety of ways. Mainly it was his stubborn reluctance to accept that there was any other team in the country worth watching other than Liverpool. It was such a pig-headed, arrogant and boorish attitude, particularly as he'd never been to Anfield in his life. Secondly, he regularly beat me at squash. I took the game very seriously and he knew he was a better player than me, but used Liverpool-like arrogant tactics to demoralise me on court. These included only calling out the score when he was in front, stopping the game to tie up his shoelace when I was in front, and taking a quick draw on his asthma drug when things got tight, giving him an extra special physical powers. I'd get so frustrated I actually broke 2 rackets against the wall in temper. I'm not a violent man by nature, but Kevin was bringing out the worst in me. To cap it all, he was living with the wonderful Helen, and candid conversations with her revealed that she wasn't at all happy and wanted to leave, but she had a financial stake in the house and it would prove tricky. Watching the game at Ipswich didn't help the situation. Liverpool won, and the trip home was a constant stream of Liverpool this and Liverpool that. I just wanted him to disappear. At least West Ham won, 1-0 at Everton with a goal from Tim Breaker. It was a sign of the decline that was to follow, that a dire 0-0 draw with Sheffield United followed at Upton Park. The FA Cup campaign began at home to Watford. I'd had a premonition and felt that we would win 2-1 after Watford were winning 1-0 at half-time. Unfortunately, I only put money on the score, which yielded a whole £5. It was a poor performance. Chapman was beginning to play like a donkey, and it was only the introduction of Steve Jones that provided any sort of shape and movement up front. Martin Allen and Mike Marsh scored to give us a rather fortunate passage into the next round. We were drawn away at Notts County. I didn't see any reason to make plans for Wembley. My piece on the Nottingham Forest game proved to be a winner. I had it published in 90 minutes and received 2 tickets for the Coca-Cola Cup final in March. At least I was due 1 Wembley visit. Mum and Dad moved down to Hastings and I spent the day lugging furniture around as we lost 3-1 at Villa. A few days later I had a job interview at a property management company based in Croydon by the name of Central Property Services. The managing director, Roy Woodman, appeared to be a charming man who sold the company to me totally. They seemed to be progressive, used modern techniques, had a young complement of staff with forward ideas, and they were working towards a goal of wide expansion. I was taken on a guided tour of the office and felt confident that I'd got the job. Surely they wouldn't have bothered with the tour if they hadn't been sure. My instincts proved correct, and the next day Woodman phoned and offered me a position of management surveyor with an improved salary, a better car and a profit share. I was delighted. My initial disappointment at being made redundant by Mike ebbed as I looked forward to a new future. I could forget about Karen 2 and concentrate on qualifying at a company manned by professionals. There was a director at the company who I'd been told I could work with to build up my experience for the professional exam, and my third attempt would be a formality. It all seemed too good to be true. Naturally, as you can guess, it was. Chapter 73. Still crazy after all these years. West Ham United 2, Manchester United 2, 26th of February 1994. Before starting work at Central, there was the small matter of a 3-3 draw at home to Norwich City, which tested everyone's patience and nerve. Ludo made 2 bad mistakes to deny us the win we deserved. Woodman had phoned me the day before to confirm my appointment, and in a genial and friendly conversation, I told him I was going to Upton Park that evening for the game. He revealed he was a Chelsea supporter. I should have smelled a rat at that stage, but as Mike had been a Chelsea fan too, I didn't see how it would cause any more problems than before. We managed to scrape a 1-1 draw at Notts County. Ludo made another error to allow Gary Lund to give County the lead, but Steve Jones equalised. I started at Central on the 1st of February, and during my first 2 weeks was made to feel most welcome and had the relatively light workload. I was working with Jane, who was due to depart a month later on maternity leave. Working with her, it was very difficult to make mistakes, and I didn't have to get too deeply involved. Within a few days of starting, people started to disappear. I was already aware from the number of names being bandied about that there was a high turnover of staff. Someone would say, "Oh, Martin used to deal with that, he left a few weeks ago." Or, "That's one of John's files, I've no idea how he used to organise things." It was a recipe for disaster. There was little or no continuity. It appeared that staff lasted on average about 8 months before moving on. I couldn't understand why, but I soon found out. We played Notts County in the replay at Upton Park. It was one of the worst performances I'd ever seen from a West Ham side, and that includes a number of defeats I could mention. It seemed that the tactics were totally wrong. Chapman was being targeted with long balls from the back, and I always felt his strength was getting on the end of crosses. Things improved when Steve Jones came on, but I have to place the blame for Chapman's demise on the shoulders of Billy and Harry, or whoever had the bright idea of using him as a target man. The crowd got on his back immediately, and he became the scapegoat for the all-round poor performance. I was so pleased when he eventually scored the extra time winner. He had my utmost sympathy. Things continued well in the new job. A new surveyor joined, David, who seemed like a good bloke, despite showing tendencies towards Crystal Palace, and another new management surveyor, Peter, who'd been built up by Woodman to be the best thing since the Zipper. The new team, or Central Mark III, had been born. We all took in a deep breath as Jane left, and I had to cope on my own. It was like taking the water wings off in the kiddies' pool and being asked to swim the Atlantic. It was apparent right from the start that the workload was far too much for one person. I sat tight, worked as hard as I could, and waited for the wheels to fall off. West Ham drew 0-0 at Manchester City, and still we awaited another league victory. It wasn't too serious as we were drawing, not losing, but I was slightly concerned that the initial momentum created by the arrival of Burrows, Marsh and Chapman had been halted so easily by the defeat at Sheffield. I broke the bank and sent a dozen red roses to Karen 2 on Valentine's Day. They were anonymous, but she knew who'd sent them and phoned to thank me. I asked her to consider coming out for dinner, just as friends. she said she'd consider it. We had a tricky fifth-round tie away at non-league Kidderminster. They had rubbed us all up the wrong way by appearing to be disappointed when they were drawn against us. Ungrateful bastards. They all wanted Manchester United away. They should have looked on the bright side. At least this way they stood a chance of the quarter-finals. Unlike Farnborough and Aldershot before them, Kidderminster decided to retain home advantage, and a capacity crowd of, wait for it, 7,850 saw Lee Chapman score the only goal. I was grateful to have got through. I hate playing non-league sides. When Manchester United came to town, they were on a roll of something like 30 games unbeaten. The new stand at the old South Bank was ready to open to greet them, and for the first time since the end of the previous season, there was an all-round atmosphere at Upton Park. The Paul Ince hate campaign had reached fever pitch. It wasn't just his misdemeanours which had increased his unpopularity. His general arrogance and attitude made him an object of hatred everywhere outside Manchester, but also due to the fact that we'd been relegated twice and his injury the last time Manchester United played at Upton Park, he'd not actually appeared in front of us at home. This was rectified. Each time Ince got the ball, he was severely booed and made to feel about as welcome as a tax inspector at Ken Dodd's house. Tim was watching his last game with me before he went on a trip that he anticipated would take over a year. He wanted to make the most of the day, and we therefore met in London first for a few beers. Mark Hughes put United ahead after a mistake by Bishop put Roy Keane in a position to cross. We had enough chances to level it up before half-time, but it was midway through the second half by the time Chapman scored the equaliser. 3 minutes later, Morley added a second and the crowd were in raptures. We only had to hang on for a few minutes before Mouth Almighty himself grabbed a late equaliser for United. It was yet another example of overdoing the barracking. It was a bad blow to have victory whipped away in the dying seconds, particularly as we would have enjoyed the kudos that goes with ending such a long unbeaten run, but it was not to be. Lee Chapman made an error after the game, having a go at the fans for having a pop at Ince, intimating that there was a section of West Ham fans who tended to do that sort of thing. It was the same all round in the press. All the papers were very quick to leap to the defence of the innocent Ince and slate the racist and abusive West Ham fans. They really didn't know what they were talking about. To compound the misery, we could only manage a 1-1 draw at doomed Swindon Town. Again, it was a late show. An 89th minute equaliser for Swindon meant we'd have blown away a potential 4 points and were slipping perilously towards relegation. The memorial game for Bobby Moore took place the next Monday. It was also the official opening of the new stand, which had been named in his honour. I arrived early that Monday night, almost an hour before kick-off, as I quite fancied a seat in the new stand, but the queues put me off. As it was, I could quite easily have got a seat. Patience is a virtue. As a West Ham fan, I ought to know that. I took instead a seat in the East Stand, as I hadn't done so for a while, and waited for the events of the evening to unfold. I had an uneasy feeling as I sat high up in the stand, watching the sheets of rain come down against the white lights in the corner. It was reminiscent of televised winter nights in Belgium, Jeux sans frontières, and Stuart Hall laughing his head off. I half expected to see a man with Ronald McDonald shoes and a rubber head come bowling out of the tunnel, but Lee Chapman wasn't playing. I was worried it might have got tacky. I needn't have. The 1964 and 65 cup-winning sides came onto the pitch and performed a short but sweet opening ceremony for the new stand. The opposition for the game were a Premiership 11 managed by George Graham. The squad of 22 consisted of one player from each of the other 21 Premiership sides, plus Liam Brady. Tony Cottee, representing Everton, put them ahead with a goal that brought tears to my eyes. It evoked memories of happier days and sparked off the idea in a number of people's minds that it would be nice to see him back. Julian Dix represented Liverpool and sparked off the same emotions. He'd only been away a few months, but we were missing him already. We won the game through goals from Clive Allen and Jeroen Bora, and everyone went away happy. It was like seeing an old lover on the street, stopping for a beer or two and realising that you were both still crazy after all these years.